can rescue, you alone can save, you alone can lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death, lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death. You alone belong the highest praise. You alone belong the highest praise. Lift up our eyes, you're the giver of life. Lift up our eyes, you're the giver of life. Lift up our eyes, you're the giver of life. Lift up our eyes, you're the giver of life. You alone can rescue, you alone can save, you alone can lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death. You alone belongs the highest praise. You alone belongs the highest praise. You alone belongs the highest praise. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Go ahead and take a minute or two to greet one another, and then if you have children under 5 or under, they're dismissed to the nursery at this time.
I saw some guy.
Morning. All right. How are you?
I went to register at 10 a.m. I just went over and listened to him. But I didn't know it was going to cost me. I thought the food was going to be out. Yeah, I didn't know for sure.
Yeah, they weren't really manning the registration.
How did you want to come?
There were a few empty seats, but it was pretty packed.
Quite well. We were issuing membership applications after John Temple Health.
Listen to your quiet right now.
I don't know, you have to ask him.
A bunch of people did ask me about it, like during the Q&A session.
Start finding your seats. Start finding your seats. It's good to see everyone. It's fun to see everyone talking with one another and greeting. It's good to be with you all. And together, we believe by the Holy Spirit that God's presence, the presence of Jesus is seen amongst us when we gather in His name. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, and there's more than 2 or 3 here. Let's pray. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. In the name of Jesus Christ, and through the power of the Holy Spirit, we pray. Amen. So I was asked today to speak about and to try to kind of frame the sin that led to the cross. No small task, I suspect. We'll see what I can do. Years ago, when I was actually still a student here in college, I think it was my junior year, I had just gotten married to my husband Andrew, who I get to join in a few weeks in Moldova. He's been over there since last June or so, and I get to see him. I fly over on the 3rd of May. I had just gotten married, and we had moved into our apartment, which is now the annex of the Longs apartment, and as I understand it, the Bunces also lived in that little tiny apartment on campus, right over here, and so forth. Just gotten married, and a friend of mine, well, I guess she wasn't really a friend of mine at the time, more of a sort of kind of acquaintance. A woman by the name of Allie Antonopoulos came over to the apartment to talk to me, and she asked me if I'd be willing to help her work on a week of camp at Rock Lake Christian Assembly. Who all has kind of been to Rock Lake Christian Assembly in Vesterberg? Oh my goodness, like a ton of you. So he is at work in their lives, and in their minds and their hearts. And we live in a world that kind of tends to dismiss young women and so forth, and because of different things that are going on, that doesn't encourage them to think. And so we really wanted to do that. So what I'm about to share with you actually emerged out of the different years of summer camp that I did. I went on to do summer camp with Allie for, I think, 7 years in a row, including the year I was living out in California with Andrew, and one of the years, several of the years I was living down south in Tennessee or North Carolina. I traveled back up for that week of camp to work with Allie and so forth. And we really developed this lovely partnership. What I'm about to share with you again comes out of those weeks of camp, in particular, it might have been the second year, I was working and trying to figure out, how do I create something to be able to communicate with these young women, something that will really enable them, equip them to have sort of a framework for reading Scripture, and particularly for sort of rethinking and refreshing what it means to read Scripture in light of what I had learned to communicate as the gospel. Now, so this is the next piece of this that I'd like you to turn to your neighbor, and just for a minute or so, just a minute, when I say the word, sin, what's the first thing that just sort of pops into your mind? Just turn to your neighbor. What's the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear the word sin? Feel free to whisper it if it's, kind of gross. Anybody care to share some of the things that first popped in? Yeah. Public school. All right, very good. Yeah. The word sin. Okay, so you kind of saw the word sin in your mind? Yeah. Lying. Mm-hmm. Others? Who had like lying or something like that kind of just pop into your head? Yeah. Others? Very specifically the letter S. Okay, very good. Yeah. Down. Doubt. Got it. Others? Man, the kids are leading us today. Any adults? Yeah. Black darkness. Yeah. Death. Others? Anybody kind of think of it like the Ten Commandments? And like not like against the Ten Commandments? Anything like that? Anybody?
Wrong.
Wrong? Okay, yeah. Anything else? Just sort of pop into your mind.
Separation.
Bad.
Separation.
Separation. Shame. Omission and commission. Ooh, fancy like $20 words. Very nice, very nice. Others? Anybody else? Panic? Interesting. So keep that in mind. Keep the thing that first pops into your head in mind. One of the things that I try to teach my students at school here, and some of you are actually here today, so, previews, is this. The first thing that pops into our mind when we hear or see a word is what we call kind of the connotation of it. That's the common use. That's how it's oftentimes used in our experience, so that we have learned that when we hear or see a word or a term or an idea, those are the things that come to mind with it. So the tool that I'm about to offer you is my way of trying to spell out what I want to pop into your brain when you think of see, read, hear, etc. The word sin. And so, it's a picture. It's a picture. So, walk with me, if you will, back to the beginning. Back to the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I guess there's a red marker. We'll use red. Where? The two evil colors? Did anybody think of these colors?
I think when I think
Yeah?
evil, I think
Interesting.
when I think evil, I think those colors, but when I think of sin, not.
That might be an interesting word association thing. Anyway, focus. In the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth hadn't quite been put into good order yet. Didn't have much good shape to it. It was just sort of, there, hanging out, but not really in good order. Anybody kind of remember what God does first in the beginning when God does something else next. What does God do next?
Separates the light from the darkness.
God organizes. God puts the light and the darkness into good order. When you think of salvation, which is kind of the counterpart, it's kind of the partner to sin. When you think of salvation, I want you to think of good order, and specifically, God's good order. So, sidebar. When I was in high school, I was part of the forensic team or the speech team. Anybody participate in like the speech team in high school? Competitive speeches like informative or poetry or anything like that? Yeah. So I absolutely loved it. And one year, we had kind of a teacher who would jump in and jump out to do some theater with us, but she wasn't the regular coach for the speech team. And she came in to kind of help out each of us with our speeches. And she helped me with one of mine. And so she gave me this kind of tip, pro tip. Remember the pro tips from evangelism? Yeah, it's like bookends and, anyway. So she gave me this pro tip, and she said, when you start a speech, just give yourself a moment to kind of let the silence ring out with your audience and with yourself, to focus you in, and to also give them kind of a chance to just sort of like put everything else that they had just heard aside. And so I was like, okay, a moment. So I'm going to give you an impression of what me taking that moment looks like. And then I started. How many of you felt a little awkward while I was standing up here doing that?
I felt suspense.
You felt some suspense? Yeah? Were there any moments when you kind of thought I was going to like jump in, start? Okay, so make some observations. What clued you in? What gave you the sense that, oh, she's about ready to start?
You raising your head.
I raised my head a little bit. Yeah, good. Yeah. You're going to say that too? Yeah, I raised your head. Raise my head. Anything else?
Deep breath.
A deep breath. Good. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, unfolding my hands. I forgot I was going to do that. Yeah. Anything else? So your brain has this amazing way of drawing conclusions based on clues. Clues like a deep breath or a head lifted up tells you that, oh, she's about to begin. And when your expectations, the conclusion you think is going to happen, doesn't happen, it kind of throws you off a little bit, right? I was hoping that somebody would giggle nervously. Nobody did because you're all too polite. Thank you. But I was kind of hoping somebody would just sort of like try to break that silence a little. Because when we, especially when there's somebody up here trying to lead us in something, it's a very solemn occasion, right? We don't have much silence. That's an expectation that we have decided kind of together, but also it was sort of decided for us, and it's just kind of the way things work. So here's another piece of what I want you to think about and pop into your head when you think about sin and salvation. Sin sort of messes up our expectations for what can and cannot happen in life. And so to kind of partner it up with salvation. What sin kind of does is it sort of sets up our expectations for disorder. So what's salvation? What do I want to have pop into your head when you hear salvation? Order. And specifically, God's good order. Now, forgive me, I'm a teacher. So here we go. Can you say that with me? God's good order. So what is it that I want to pop into your head when you think of salvation? God's good order. God's good order. And sin, likewise, shapes our imagination in a way that our expectations for what can and cannot happen, for how things should be and are and can be ordered, is just not quite there. So in the beginning, God creates, and God sets about filling up the world and sets about putting that world into good order, to God's good order. So what are some of the other things that God creates? We don't have to go in order, even though that might be keeping with the theme. What are some of the other things that God creates in those beginning chapters of Genesis? Yeah. Yes. And when God creates the land animals, forgive my art, it's not my strong suit. Does God put the land animals in the sky? Why not? Because they're land animals. They don't belong in the sky. They belong on the land. So this is my best impression of a land animal. Four legs. And an awesome tail, because tails. And a body. And head. It's a chipmunk? Okay.
It's a squirrel dog.
Any other guesses what that might be? A fox?
Skunk.
Pony?
Hybrid.
Skunk? Hybrid? Yeah, I think hybrid is probably the best term for what I've just drawn there. So let's, for practical purposes, those of you who actually were in my camp, do you remember what I called this? I see Sierra. I think she's the only one. Do you remember? No? Okay, good. It'll be a bit of a surprise. Called it a skunk horse. So the skunk horses / land animals. Oh, Lexi, yeah, you were in there. Yeah, totally. Did you remember?
Yeah, I yelled it.
Sweet. Yes, sorry. Not here. Yeah. Well, thank you. Skunk horses. The land animals, they go on the land, and the sea critters, they go in the land. Wait. No, where do they go? In the sea, yes! That's where they belong. What else does God create besides critters? Land and skies. Creates the stars. And what do the stars do? They give light, and they give light specifically at a certain time, right? At night. Right. And the lesser light that governs. When you think about governing, ruling, reigning, putting it into order. There's an orderliness to this. Everything sort of fits together and makes sense. There's a couple other things that go on. Oh, we should probably put those stars up. And then there's the sun. Sierra, I totally should have had you draw this. It would have been so much more beautiful. For me, it's kind of, special. What else does God create? There's a couple more things we missed. The planets, the cosmos, all the stuff up there. Yeah, what else? A couple more things. Plants. Right. And when God describes those plants, say God creates like a lemon tree. So we know that lemon trees, when they bear their fruit, when they have their seeds and their fruit and so forth, what comes out of those seeds is grapes, right?
No.
And I think you just flunked biology. So what comes out of a lemon tree?
More lemon trees.
Lemons! Right! Because that makes sense. That's in good order. That makes sense. These things work together. If you have a lemon tree, it's going to have little baby plants, little plantlings that are also the same kind, right? It makes sense. Good. Very good. Another thing that God created. Oh, we should probably draw a lemon tree, shouldn't we? I had a lemon tree when I was living in California. Whoa, were those lemons good? Anyway.
Is the earth flat?
No, that's the moon.
Oh, sorry, I got it wrong.
I have no idea where that comment is coming from, so we're just going to move right along. Lemon trees. What else does God create? Humans. God creates humans. Super artistic. God creates what kinds of humans?
Land humans.
Land humans? Yep, they go on the land. Not so much on the sky, to my deep and everlasting sorrow. I would love to be able to fly, cannot. Except in an airplane, and that's a totally different experience. Kind of two kinds of humans in Genesis chapter 1. Two kinds of humans. Male and female. And God tells male and female human together that they've kind of got this two-part mission. Two parts to the mission. One, they're to go out into the world and do what? Anybody remember?
Cause order.
They are to cause order. That's the second part of it, yeah. They're to cause order. They're to rule. They're to reign. They're to exercise dominion. They are to set about the work of putting the rest of the world into order.
Then they're also supposed to name it.
That comes a little bit later, but sure. There's another piece of this mission. There's another part of it. Remember?
Multiply.
What'd you say?
Like a virus.
Not certain. It's all right. There's two pieces to the mission. One of them is to go out into the world and reign. And the other one? Multiply. Have babies. Have babies.
Make babies.
Yeah. And to have babies, you gotta make the babies. And to make the babies, sorry, birds and the bees lesson. Can you just make babies with females? Can you just make babies with men? Males. Amazon.com. M-A-I-L, it's a different story. M-A-L-E, you need both male and female working together.
We're making
For both parts of the mission that God gives the humans, for both parts of the mission, you need both male and female working together. And so the picture of God's desire from the beginning, God's good order, the picture that God has been doing from the beginning, is a world that is right. Valentine's Day. Way better than Valentine's Day. Way better. Way better. Because Valentine's Day, is kind of like some puppy love, like a little bit of love that gives you all the feels and sort of get those like, aw, I like that person. That's Valentine's Day. God's good order, way better than Valentine's Day. How many hearts do you see going on here? 5? Good job. So these hearts symbolize relationships. They symbolize relationships in God's good order. One of the things that I have realized, and that is very much part of my story, is that when I was much younger, I was baptized when I was 10 years old. And my understanding of sin at that time had mostly to do with this. My understanding of sin had a ton to do with, and was pretty much focused on, my individual relationship with God. How Like for you, that's at least what you grew up with or what you think about that really kind of pops into your head most naturally when you think of sin. Anybody else? Yeah. Your comments are killing me, y'all. It's great. I really don't know what to do with that though, but so we're gonna move on. For most of us, the way we have learned to think about sin has a whole bunch to do with this, right? But what we see in Genesis, in the beginning, is all of it. Is all of it. And we see descriptions of what happens in all of it as we continue through the story. So y'all remember probably, right, at the beginning, after Adam and Eve have both been created and they've kind of met each other and they've been like, and Adam's like, whoa, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, like, whoa, man. You know, kind of cool, kind of nice, kind of so, you know, all of that is working together and it's really good. At least in the garden, right? In the garden, there's this idea that you could just reach out your hand, these two humans that can just reach out their hand and eat of trees. They don't have to really work for it. Because God's planted this garden in the east, in Eden. And God's put them in this garden to care for it, to tend it, to work together. God's also got a couple of special trees. Not a lemon tree, not a grapevine, but a couple of special trees. What are those special trees? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yes, that's one of them. And there's another one. And the tree of life. Now, one of those trees, God says to the man and to the woman, you can eat of. Which one is the one that they can eat of? The tree of life. But God says you're not to eat of the other tree. You're not to eat of the other tree. So there's part of me that's tempted to kind of frame this other tree of the knowledge of good and evil as kind of like the tree that God has always kind of said from the beginning is not really ours to eat from. There's a part of me that's kind of tempted to think of it that way. And that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But if you're listening, one of the things I suspect you're probably hearing that's emerging out of the teaching of our church, the life of the body, as we go through the rest of the scriptures, as we've been thinking about all of these different things, is that God does give creation, especially humans, eventually the capacity to make some good decisions about good and evil, to exercise discernment. God does that by giving us the church, by allowing us, by binding us together and making us one. God does seem, in some ways, to give us access to that knowledge. But let's set that aside for just a moment. That's just like a little tidbit, you know, to kind of get your brain thinking a little bit. Let's set that aside for a minute. God says to the man, to the woman, don't eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what happens? They eat. They eat. And then what happens? They will eventually die. What happens before that? If you want to, open up in your text. See what happens. Genesis 3. They become aware of their nakedness. The thing that makes them different from one another, the things that make males and females different from one another, is no longer a like, oh wow, I recognize the things that are different, and that's so good. Because that's the refrain that occurs throughout the early parts of Genesis, right? God sees what God makes, and it is so good. The moment that the male and female disobey God's good order, the moment it happens, the things that God has made different and distinct from one another become a source of shame. God creates abundance, God creates diversity, and God calls that diversity good. Part of the disorder of sin is that the things that make us different from one another are now a source of tension between us. Instead of us being able to relate to one another, celebrating the ways in which God has made us distinct and different, those differences, those distinctions, those things that make us different from one another become a problem from the moment they eat of the knowledge of good and evil. The relationship between male and female is broken. What happens next? What happens next? A little bit before that. That's eventually what happens. Yeah. And we're going to reframe that just a hair. But there's a few things that happen before this. They hide from God, it seems. Because God has to kind of ask this question. Where are you? Now, I don't want to make too much of that. But I do think that there's something in that question that is meant to make us think, that's not so much a good thing. That's not so much how things should be. And the relationship between God and the humans seems to be broken. And then God turns to Adam, says, okay, so what's happening? They're dropping markers, throwing things. What happens next? God turns to Adam and says, what happened? What does Adam say there? The woman you put here with me, she did it. Now, if something happens in, say like, my husband and I are both responsible to get the car registered, and we were supposed to go get it together, and somebody asks us, like, I don't know, the government, why didn't you get your car registered? And my husband, Andrew, looks at me and says, well, she didn't do it. She didn't get that taken care of. How do you think our relationship with one another is going to work? You got me, right? That relationship, which we'd already seen some hints, wasn't really going to be so good anymore, is broken. And so God then again turns to the woman and asks the woman, what happened? What's the woman say? Y'all remember? The serpent did what? Deceived me. The serpent deceived me. And anytime we go around blaming other people for things or other things for things, that seems to me to point to show a disconnect, something that's out of order. Something else that's interesting here. Never mind. In Genesis 3, we have descriptions of things that happen in all of these different relationships. We have descriptions of things that will happen. Between the woman and the serpent, there will be enmity. It's a big word. They're going to be enemies. There's going to be this tension. Instead of the world working the way it's supposed to, there's going to be fighting and conflict. And instead of the male and female working together in partnership and in unity, there's going to be this constant striving, this constant fighting. Travel back with me, if you will, to elementary school. Ever play games where it was boys against the girls? So, when I was in 6th grade, our PE teacher had us play this game he called Free the Frizz. It was basically capture the flag, but with a frisbee. And he always had us play guys against gals, men against women, and we were in 6th grade, so it was really boys against girls. And there was this one boy who always just delighted in like yanking girls across the line and sending them out. And so I decided when he came in across our side to try to go after the flag, I decided that I was going to get him. Because I was sick of him being so strong and just being able to like yank little girls off across the line and sending them out. So he kind of came in this way towards the flag, and I came around this way, and I was ready. So I was flat out sprinting. Well, then he decided to backpedal and collided, and I broke my nose on the back of his head. Yeah. Did I get him? You better believe I got him. Because it was on my side. It was on my side. Contact, boom, you're out. It's like that now, isn't it? Between males and females and between humans in general. My side, your side, your side. You come across onto my side and boom, my goal is to get you. But maybe I break my nose as we're doing that. So here's the thing. When you think of sin, I don't want you to just think about the relationship between you and God. I don't want you to just think about these rules that you follow or don't follow. I want you to think about a whole world that is in disorder. And that the shape, the momentum, the direction, the future of that world is broken, messed up, terrible. When you think of sin and what it is that God needs to set right, don't just think of an individual's relationship with God. Think about all the brokenness that is occurring. Think about it as a system. That the whole world is corrupted. And then, in anticipation of next week, ponder this as we go out. If the whole shape of the world in all of these different relationships is brokenness, is leading towards destruction, corruption, and death, ponder this as we go out. How is it that as Jesus comes to the people of God, to the place, to the people that have been waiting for God to move, who have this expectation that God is going to do something in the world to bring about right order. How is it that Jesus does something about this by dying? You got the question? How is it that as Jesus comes into the people of God who have been waiting for God to do something about this mess, that one of the major things that God does through Jesus is ask him to die? Ponder this as we go out. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for your word, for the testimony of people who have sought to follow you, who have struggled with God and humans. Thank you for knitting us into the story, for welcoming us into it. And thank you, Lord, for being a God who is on the move in the broken world, to bring about reconciliation, redemption, and salvation, restoration of your goodwill. Give us eyes to see, hearts to imagine, minds to imagine, and actions to demonstrate and live out the good news that you have acted in the world to bring about redemption and reconciliation. In our life especially, Lord, together as your people. In the name of Christ Jesus and through the power of the Holy Spirit we pray. Amen.
I'm not going to move nearly as much. That's right. First time guest here, so I don't give that spiel. But I do want to share several announcements with you all about upcoming weeks. As Kate reminded us, next week is Easter Sunday, where we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And we try to do that in style. And so next Sunday is going to be a little bit different than this Sunday. We're going to meet at 9:30 in the Legacy Cafe cafeteria. It's that nice new addition that used to be in the back of the building. And we're going to have breakfast. In the context of that meal, we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper together, everyone as a group. So try to be there at 9:30 because we usually start the meal with the Lord's Supper. And it's really important to us to partake of that together. So try to get there maybe about 10 minutes early if you can, so we can get going and celebrate the Lord's Supper together. If you haven't yet responded to Beth to say, hey, we're going to be there, let her know. She's right there. Wants to reach your hand, certainly. My wife is. Okay. Let her know you plan on being there, and that way we can have enough food and also have enough chairs for all the people who are going to be there. If you know of anyone that you're planning to invite, who's going to be from out of town, you're going to bring with you, you're more than welcome. Again, get that number to Beth so we can be properly prepared. And so we're going to have a meal there for the first hour, so there's not going to be Bible study for the adults and classes for the kids. I believe Sam's going to be preaching. Yeah. So we're going to meet here at the normal time at 10:30. But please come for the meal. It's such a great time to share together. Also, next Saturday, Alexis and Warren are hosting a youth event at their place from 3 to 10. If you don't know about that, and what are the ages for that, Alexis?
It's the whole youth group, so.
Junior, senior high? Micah and up. So, event next Saturday from 3 to 10. There's going to be games aplenty, I hear. So, if you have any questions about that in details and where Alexis lives, you can ask her. I'm holding in my hand a card. This is a prayer card for Anthony and Adrian Vasquez, who were missionaries in India that we've supported as a church by covering various expenses that they had. And they've had to come back to the United States because of visa issues, and they basically locked out of India. So we're not able to do their mission, which led them to this kind of desert season, like their heart and soul is poured into their work in India. So they've been back in the States praying about the Lord's leading, and God has called them to go to Hungary, where Adrian was raised and was born, and they're going to be missionaries there and continue doing similar work that they were doing in India, at least as far as Anthony's art ministry. Other stuff's going to be different. Anyway, they want our prayer, and especially because Adrian's family is from there, and they're kind of nervous about that. And her parents aren't committed Christians, and they're worried about that dynamic. And so they just want our prayer. And our branch helped them come to Lansing this week and did a fundraiser in town. And we just want to lift them up in prayer. So on the back table there is a bunch of cards like this. If you have an office, you could take one, put it in your office, and remember to pray for them each day at work or a desk at home or some prominent place. They would love your prayer support. Lastly, Phil and Pam were here for Bible study this morning, and Phil's back is just in a really bad spot right now. And it took him a good 3 minutes to get from the door to the couch. And I challenged him to a race in one. That tells you something about how bad he's doing. So he's in a lot of pain. They want to do MRIs, and that's not something doctors like to do, plan to do. So they could really use your prayer. They can go back home. We just want to pray for his comfort level. So that's how I want to close in prayer today, kind of lifting up Phil. Do we have another announcement?
Yeah, those interested in kickball will be meeting for 10 minutes afterwards there.
In the student hall area?
Yep.
Anything else? All right, let's pray. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for a good word from you through Kate.